My strategy was I would rather have people leave the conference scratching their head than yawning. My goal has always been to speak to the experts in the room. So I would never water down my content. I was really, really conscientious of making sure that any venture capitalist that I worked with, that their clients got incredible service from me. Look, you're going to be the guy who develops the methodology for our business. You're going to constantly be innovating, and I'll be the guy in the front, and I'll hire other people to manage the accounts. You just go behind the scenes and invent stuff. I learned in the client services world that, um, a good relationship with bad results is better than a bad relationship with good results.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and you're in for a treat. I've never met anybody that's had more than 2 bites at the apple. David Rodnitzky's had 3 bites at the apple, and he's waiting for another one. This is going to be a phenomenal episode of the podcast. David, thank you for making some time for us today, man. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Jerome. It's great to be here. Excited to talk.
So I alluded to it when I opened up the show, but you had an exit, right?
I did have an exit many times over.
So how did you know you could sell a business? Because most people have no idea that that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't think it was possible either. So I started the agency that I founded in 2008 after working at a bunch of client side businesses for 7 years. And really, my objective in starting the business was I didn't want to work for someone else ever again. So that was the entire motivation. It was like, can I earn as much money as I was making working full time, doing consulting or agency stuff or whatever. And that was it. I had no idea that I guess it was 7 years after starting the agency that I would end up selling it.
So when you say agency, marketing agency, you're helping other businesses get traffic, right?
Yeah, so I was very early on in getting involved with Google advertising. So I started my first Google AdWords campaign in 2001, which actually back in that time, you actually negotiated a quarterly insertion order with Google. So you would say, I want the keyword lawyer. I'm willing to pay 25 cents a click. And I want it in position 2 for the next 3 months. And so totally different than what it is today. To Google's credit, they realized that wasn't very scalable. But yeah, so I did that for like 7 years client side. And then for a variety of reasons, I decided to not work on the client side anymore. And I just set up a shop in a coffee shop saying, I can help you with your Google advertising. And that's how I started the agency.
So did you have an exit plan from leaving your job or did you just walk
No,
out?
no, I didn't. I was at a company that was they had like an F on the Better Business Bureau in terms of customer service. I was traveling to India once a quarter to manage a team, and I was having some conflicts with a couple of people inside the company. And my wife was 8 months pregnant, so with our first child. So, being in India when your first child is born is probably not a good marriage strategy unless you live in India, which I wasn't, and I just wasn't happy with the company. So my only strategy was like, I need to leave this company, and I'm just gonna wait till the baby's born, and while I'm waiting, just see if something bubbles up. And so I tried a bunch of different things. I tried trying to become an online poker superstar. That lasted about 2 weeks. I launched an affiliate website on Wrinkle Cream, which did pretty well until it got hacked. I started a conference, which actually did okay until I got into a big disagreement with the other co-founders. And then I did this consulting for SEM, Google advertising. And really, it was the Google advertising that just sort of bubbled to the top. And a friend of mine, I was trying all these different businesses, and a friend of mine said, David, if people are willing to pay you a lot of money for doing this Google stuff, maybe that's what you should focus on. And so that's how I transitioned really from doing client side work to working at a client to starting an agency. It was really sort of a combination of trial and error and finding something that worked.
Whoa. It's always interesting to hear how people got into the thing. Uh, you were talking about luck before we started recording, and so the ability to just kind of maneuver and find the space and get paid really well for it, it doesn't happen very often. So, was there? Yeah, Are you playing it down? I feel like there had to be a little more sophistication to this and knowing what you could make in it.
I'm not playing it down, really not. I mean, I really was very set on just like I just want to get paid like a couple $100,000 a year, and I'll be very happy. Um, I think I happened to sort of start this at a really good time in Silicon Valley because 2008, when I started, actually was sort of the tail end of a recession. There was all the mortgage-backed securities crisis, all these homes were being foreclosed on. The economy was at a little bit of a free fall, and there was all these companies in Silicon Valley that had raised billions of dollars from venture capital firms who are now telling them batten down the hatches and conserve every dollar you can. And so they didn't have the budget to hire staff. They had no choice but to hire consultants. Because I was very early on in my consultancy or agency, I was charging them really good rates for them. I mean, my minimum fee at that time was like $2,000 a month. And most agencies who are good in this space probably are more like 7,500 or 10,000 a month. So the combination of the economy being bad and people needing to do less with more, with me offering some bargain-based prices because I didn't have any infrastructure. I was literally working out of a coffee shop. Just started this ball rolling where I was getting um, just inbound leads like crazy. And the other thing to remember is at that time when I started the agency, there were probably 5,000 people in the world who knew what they were doing in Google advertising. Today, there's probably 5 million. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe there's 500,000. But it really was, again, sort of going back to the being lucky versus being good. I had spent like 7 years becoming an expert at SEM, and I was one of the very few in the world. And it was just the timing was perfect. Now, I think along the way, I mean, I made a lot of pivots that made the business scale and make it sellable. I mean, for example, I learned pretty early on that just offering Google advertising services was not going to be enough to win big clients. I used to say when I was just doing SEM, I used to say an expert at everything is an expert at nothing. So you really got to hire an expert for SEM, and that worked for a while. But then I'd go into these big accounts, and they'd be like, well, "Yeah, but I can't handle 10 agencies. I can't have a paid social agency and an SEO agency and an SEM agency." And so I pivoted. I said, all right, we got to offer more than that. And so I ended up hiring experts. I changed the name of the company. We were initially called PPC Associates, which was a very Google related name. I said, we got to be something else. So we changed to 3Q Digital. We ended up actually acquiring an agency that was smaller than us, but that had complementary services. They were better at SEO. They were better at data analytics. So, I'm not saying I didn't make some good decisions along the way, but I also sort of started at sort of just the perfect time to start an SEM agency.
So you used the word expert probably 7 times since we've been in the show, and I don't even think we're 5 minutes in. So tell me more about expert and expertise in a world where everybody has a camera and they can upload something to social media and claim that they can help you.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to differentiate. I think one of the things that I always believed in whenever I was giving any sort of writing a white paper or doing a webinar or doing a speech at a conference was my strategy was I would rather have people leave the conference scratching their head than yawning. And so what I meant by that was my goal has always been to speak to the experts in the room. So I would never water down my content so that someone who was just getting started would understand and that the experts would be bored. And I remember very specifically, I spoke at a conference in Portland, and I unveiled a methodology that we had built at 3Q that we call the alpha beta account structure, which was our way of running Google ad campaigns. And it's not like it's super complex, but at the time it was very novel. And I was speaking on a panel with another guy who was, I would say, much more of an influencer than me, who is better known in the industry. And he was speaking to the newbies, and I was speaking to the experts. And after the conference, probably 5 people came up to me and asked me questions, but they were all really, really senior experts. And he had probably 30 people waiting at his table to ask him questions that were very basic. Over time, I mean, I think he did fine for himself, but that white paper that I released became probably one of the biggest drivers of traffic to my business. There are several companies that have built software to implement the process that we developed. And there were even conferences that we were there, they would have a panel debating our methodology, and we weren't even at the conference. This was in like 2012 that I developed this white paper. And actually, like 2 weeks ago, I got an email from someone asking me for a clarification on some points in the paper. So I think you develop expertise by talking to experts. And if the experts are following someone, I'd much rather sort of find someone who has 100, CEOs following them than has 20,000, entry level people who are just trying to learn the basics. And that was kind of my approach. And I think that's how you sort of tell if someone is truly an expert.
That's how you tell if somebody's truly an expert.
Yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. But you ask people who are at the top of their game, who do you follow? Who do you recommend? And you usually end up getting sort of the same answers over and over again, and that's who you gravitate to.
Wow. So you became chief everything officer. You walk out, you got your laptop. I think you had a laptop since you're at a coffee shop. Uh, and you're calling on people? Like, is this cold call? Like, how does this work in 2001?
2008 was when I started
Eight,
the
eight.
agency. I think that I got a lot of connections with venture capital firms actually. And I got a couple people introduced me to some firms, and I basically said to these firms, like, look, you guys can put all this money into these companies. I mean, let me help you scale them and make them profitable. And so I started to build a reputation in Silicon Valley that like if you had just raised money, that 3Q Digital was the place to go. I had this marketing theory that I called triangulation, which was basically I wanted wherever someone turned in Silicon Valley, I wanted them to end up seeing 3Q as their logical choice. So it would sort of work like this. You go to your venture capital firm and you say, I'm trying to do this Google stuff. I can't make it work. Who should I talk to? And they say, well, we work with 3Q. You should hire them. And then you are driving down the highway in Silicon Valley and you see a billboard for 3Q. So we ran billboards. We ran ads on local national public radio. We spoke at every conference we could in Silicon Valley. We hosted executive dinners in Silicon Valley for CMOs and for investors. We had a client summit in Silicon Valley where we went to the San Francisco Giants Stadium. We had Jerry Rice come one year. We had Barry Bonds come one year. And we invited all of our clients and all of our prospects. So at the end of the day, you know, we had so many different touch points in Silicon Valley that it was almost like a fait accompli that someone would end up choosing us as their agency. The best story I can give you on this, which is always a fun story, is I got a cold call once, and my executive assistant came in and said, "You have a cold call from someone." And I said, "Yeah, well, okay, I don't really take cold calls. Who is it?" And she said, "Someone named Ann Wojcicki or something like that." And it was Ann Wojcicki, who was the founder of 23andMe, and at that time was married to Sergey Brin, who was the co-founder of Google. And what she said to me was, she said, "Look, I went to the Google ad team and I said, who should we work with for SEM?" And they said, "We can't give you a recommendation. Here's a list of 10 agencies, but you should choose the one on the top of the list." And that was us. So, I think one of the things I'll just sort of, I know I'm sort of rambling on this topic, but it's a good question. One of the things that I really love talking to any founder, but especially agency founders about is this concept that if you can't be number one in a category, create a category you can be number one in. And what I sort of decided early on in 3Q was our category we could be number one in is we could be the number one performance marketing agency for startups in Silicon Valley. So it was a combination of a service offering, a location, and a type of client. And by triangulating on that and sort of making sure we were everywhere that those companies were going to be, we ended up getting a ton of business.
So are you hosting client dinners in year one with Jerry Rice?
It took a couple of years to get to that. It took a
Okay,
couple of
because I
years.
mean, he was my favorite receiver. Like, I mean, that was the whole thing for me. But so
He's a
let's
great guy, and I can just tell you that like we've had a lot of people come to our conferences, and usually they stay for an hour, sign autographs, and leave. And in his case, he signed autographs for an hour, and I came up to him afterwards and I said, "Jerry, thank you so much. Um, you can go. You've been here for an hour. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to hang out and mingle. And hung out for another 45 minutes just talking to people. So highly recommend Jerry Rice anyone at one of your events.
Wow. So year one, you already had the connection with the venture capital folks, or you knew people who connected you with the venture capital folks,
I
and
had
you use your track record at the agency you were working for to sell them.
Yeah, I had known some of them. I had a couple of key people, my brother being one of them, frankly, who was sort of working in the venture capital world, who was just going around, and every time he met a venture capitalist, he introduced them to me. So it kind of built on itself. I think the thing that keep in mind about Silicon Valley is it's a small valley, which is another way of saying that you have to sort of keep your promises to people, and if you do, you'll get rewarded in spades. If you don't, you'll be quickly pushed out of the ecosystem. And so I was really, really conscientious of making sure that any venture capitalist that I worked with, that their clients got incredible service from me. So I was to the point of being paranoid that I would tell my team, like this is a referral from so and so who has given us five other referrals. We need to treat this like it's art. Treat it like it's your money. So initially didn't have that many introductions, but over time, every time we had a satisfied client and the client was venture backed, eventually the client would go to a board meeting and say, "Yeah, we're having success in Google because of 3Q Digital." The venture capitalists would say, "I want to meet with these guys," and then we would just expand the network from there.
Success begets success.
Yeah.
So, who was your first key hire? Because this seems like it scaled pretty quick.
Yeah, so my first hire was actually a guy that I had worked with previously. I had worked at a company called FindLaw, which was a legal information website, and I had hired a guy named Will Lynn, who was um, just sort of one of the smartest guys that I met in the interview process. He had a computer science background, but he also had a film degree, and just super bright. And I said, "Look, I will hire you to take on the work that I can't handle. So, um, if I kind of sign a new client, I'll give them to you, and you'll just get paid a percentage of whatever we make in revenue from that client." And so he took on these new clients, and it worked for about 3 months, to be honest with you. And what I realized was he really is not a client person. He's a behind the scenes sort of math person. So we ended up deciding, I just ended up making him a partner in the business. And I said, "Look, you're going to be the guy who develops the methodology for our business. You're going to constantly be innovating, and I'll be the guy in the front, and I'll hire other people to manage the accounts. You just go behind the scenes and invent stuff." So like that methodology that I mentioned before, the alpha beta account structure, that was basically him who developed that. He developed another structure called, somewhat pompously, the Lynn-Rodnitzky ratio, which was a methodology for measuring the success of your campaigns. And he was just relentlessly trying to find ways to sort of make us more efficient and make our clients more profitable. So, it was not what I hired him for. That wasn't my intent, was not to make him the methodology man. My thought was, if I just hire him, he's such a smart guy. He's going to just wow clients with his amazing results. I learned in the client services world that um, a good relationship with bad results is better than a bad relationship with good results. And so and I think he would admit this, he doesn't really like sort of entertaining or pleasantries or small talk. He doesn't like that, and that wasn't his expertise. So we ended up pivoting, and it ended up being a good pivot. But so I would say my first hire was a good hire, but it wasn't for what I intended it to be.
So, hire became partner in a 6 month time frame. They say the only ship that's guaranteed to sink is a partnership. It sounds like that your ship didn't sink though.
No, I mean, I think we got to the point when we sold the company the first time we sold it, which was 2015. At that point, I think Will was interested in other opportunities, and I think the company had sort of moved in a different direction. So, he's very much a like, stay up late at night and invent something amazing, and then let's just run with it. And as we got to be a bigger agency, we couldn't have that much serendipity in the business. We had to be more thoughtful and maybe slower in planning. And so by the time we sold the first time, he was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to move on." And we were like, "Yeah, you need to find something that's going to be much more entrepreneurial." and it worked out. But that was 8 years, so it was or 7 years, so it was a good run.
So
And we're still
he's
friends. His daughter is goes to my alma mater. Just started as a freshman, so we were talking about that a couple weeks ago. So happy for him, and he's happy for me.
so did he retain any ownership, or was he paid out with that first exit?
The first exit was about 45% cash and 55% earnout. And so he did have to sort of roll with us on the earnout, even though he wasn't at the company. But he got paid 100% of that when we sold the second time. So he had a good outcome.
And did you sell to like a strategic buyer, or how did you exit the first go?
The first time we sold to a strategic. So as I said, we didn't have a strategy necessarily to sell the business. I had hired an investment banker just so that they could take the inbound leads and just tell me what I should be thinking about to be future proof. And we got 6 or 7 inbound leads that were quality inbound leads from potential acquirers. And so we ran what I describe as a mini process. We just talked to those 6 or 7. We didn't send out 50 emails to somewhat random potential acquirers. And ended up getting 3 offers. And really, we got the offer that we got from the strategic was approximately 50% higher than the offer we had gotten from the other two. And we found out after the fact that the strategic, which was a publicly traded company, had told their investors on their quarterly investor call that they were going to acquire a digital agency by Q4 of 2014. Well, Q4 of 2014 came and went, and they lost on another acquisition. They got second place. And so now their investors are saying, well, wait a minute, you say you're going to have a digital agency in place by this point, and they didn't. So they were highly motivated when we came around to make sure that they won the deal. So they bid significantly over the competition and won the deal. And I thought there was great synergies between our businesses too. So it really seemed like the logical choice. And at the time, it was.
Did you get out of day-to-day operations with that transaction, or were you out of day-to-day before?
I didn't. And one of the things that was sort of specific about that transaction was because more than 50% of the payment was on an earnout, a 3-year lump sum earnout. We basically negotiated in the contract that we retained complete control of the business until they paid us the earnout. So we had the ability to hire or fire staff as we see fit, hire or fire clients as we see fit. Um, you know, make any decision we wanted around the company, and we were basically running as an independent unit until the earnout was achieved. So I had to sort of stay around and be very actively involved. The earnout was also a pretty aggressive earnout. To hit the earnout, we had to double the size of the business in 3 years. So and we did. I think we were about $17 million of revenue when we sold, and 3 years later we were at 35 million. So we did it. Um, but we had a huge amount of our compensation that was waiting at the end of that rainbow, so to speak. And when we got to the end of the rainbow, the strategic said, listen, this is not really in our best interest anymore to have you as part of the company. So we don't want to pay the earnout. We want to come up with an alternative plan. And so we went back and forth on some alternative plans. We sort of extended the payment time period with just give them a chance to maybe change their mind. Then we hired investment bankers, and we went out and we shopped the business to other companies to see if someone wanted to buy us and pay us our earnout. And we didn't get any really credible offers. So then I just kind of came together with my management team and said, all right, we need to buy the company back ourselves. So we made an offer, and we took out a small, well, I wouldn't say small, but several million dollars of debt from a local bank, and we acquired the company back.
I would have made them owner finance that thing. That's wild.
Yeah.
So they retraded you. I mean,
They had different object. When they sold us, when they bought us, I should say, they had, I think, I want to say like 10 years of consecutive profits every quarter. And the first quarter they acquired us, they had their first loss. And so their stock was not doing well. They were having a lot of changes in the company, and they just really were no longer in the position they thought they were in terms of holding us long term. So it was stressful, and I mean, I learned some lessons and things I would have done differently in the contract to maybe protect us from that kind of outcome. But it ended up being a positive for us because we ended up buying the company back for about two-thirds of what they had paid us for it. And then we were able to turn it around and sell it for about 2x what we paid for it in less than a year.
In less than a year. So did you continue using the banker that you tried before, or did you get a new one that was actually able to get some traction and some traffic?
So the banker that had tried to sell us out of the strategic was not my choice. It was the choice of the acquirer, and they were fine. They were nice people, but they had no experience in the agency M&A world. Um, and there was a friend of mine who had just sold his company with this other banker named Sanjay Chadha, who I saw the deck that I saw the offers that my friend had, and I saw the deck that this investment banker put together. And I was like, wow, this is like a step function higher in terms of professionalism. This guy knew everyone in the space. And so we signed with him instead, and you know we exceeded our expectations in terms of what we were going to get for the business by about 25%, and and did it very quickly.
Wow. So I assume, well, I guess it's a referral because your friend worked with them. Um, it's really interesting, this world of mergers, acquisitions, exits. It gets really small really fast, and there's some people who are doing it, and then there's some people who are trying to do it, and then there's a whole lot of people who aren't doing it. Uh, have you moved to just, I guess, basically doing things exclusively by referral now?
You mean in terms of how I find service providers, or
Mhm.
I would say primarily. I mean, I do occasionally get sort of a cold email from someone, and it sounds interesting, and I'll explore a potential partnership that way. But certainly, I think when I was running the business, I mean, I think referrals was probably the number way that we found all of our service partners. I mean, I think that a lot of people in the agency world, they have they imagine these amazing successes they're going to get by hiring a sales team. And, you know, um, and I've seen this happen many times that a sales team, they hire someone who's like had a ton of success, maybe working at a giant agency like a Dentsu or Havas or something like that. And they just expect that in 3 months they're going to bring Pepsi and Chevrolet over the finish line. And the truth of the matter is that any professional services that you hire as a company almost always comes from referrals and not from sales. I mean, no one chooses their lawyer because someone cold called them and said, "Hey, would you consider trying our law firm?" Or for that matter, the uh, chooses your doctor. You don't. No one gets cold called by a doctor and signs up. It's all about referrals. So professional services, that's the name of the game. And so I have found that that's the way we won business, but that's also the way that I've found most of my partners.
I love it. I guess there wasn't a lot of time when you bought the company back to set up a board and that kind of thing. So I assume you just continued in your capacity as CEO or president, and then so make the next sell.
Yeah, so when we bought the company back, I did. I mean, we celebrated. We gave everyone T-shirts and had a party that said we're an independent agency once again. The executive team's in charge. Hooray, we made it. And it was very exciting. And we did that for about 6 or 9 months. Like as I said, we actually doubled our EBITDA in about less than a year. Um, and that was partly because the company that had acquired us was really focused on revenue growth and not on profit growth. So they were pushing us for revenue growth. And so we just kind of abandoned our profit targets. Um, and that was fine under their regime. But when we were back on being independent again, we realized we needed to have some profit, not just because we might want to sell the company someday, but because profit just gives you optionality. You can hire an expert, you can acquire a company, you can pay out dividends, you can give bonuses, etc. So we focus a lot on profit.
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatcher. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
And I was running the show. And then, we got these inbound offers again from potential acquirers. We hired the investment bank that I mentioned. Um, Ended up going with choosing two family offices out of Chicago. And my intent at the time when I sold to the family offices was I'm going to partner with these guys. We're going to scale the business together. Um, and it seemed like that was the path we were going to take. But probably about 2 or 3 months into that experience of selling again, I kind of realized that I was pretty burnt out.
Yeah.
Um, I had sort of been on this roller coaster of M&A for like 4 years straight, selling the company and then fighting to get the company back and then selling again. And so I, oh, sorry, Jerome, 1 second. I gotta pause for a second. After I sold the second time, that I was actually more burnt out than I thought. And I actually remember I was flying to Dublin because we were opening an office in Ireland. And I was watching the Freddie Mercury movie on the plane. And I just started crying. And it is a sad movie, but I really never cry in movies. So I realized, like, wow, I'm really sort of not in a great place here. So I spent about 6 months trying to find sort of an exit strategy for myself. And what really ended up happening was I got introduced to a guy who had run an agency substantially bigger than mine. He had run iProspect, which was, I think, maybe a 4,000, 3,000 person agency. And I really liked him. I hired him to do a consulting project for us and just basically said, look, just tell me what you do differently if you were running this business. And he came out with a 30-page report that was amazing. I went to our board and I said, listen, we need to make this guy president or COO or something because he's awesome. They interviewed, they agreed, they made him president. He was in the company for probably 6 to 8 weeks, and he was just hungry to do more and more and more. And I was sort of hungry to do less and less and less. And so after probably 3 months, I said, look, you shouldn't be president, you should be CEO. And so I moved out of the way, made him CEO. I remained a member of the board. I remained in the executive meetings, but basically fired myself from the ultimate job of being CEO. I mean, I've always felt like an entrepreneur's job is to fire themselves from jobs. And, we talked about that earlier about how you fire yourself from account management, you fire yourself from being the chief Costco orderer. And this was the sort of penultimate firing that I finally realized that I was not the right person for the job, both because I was tired and also because the company at the point that Rob Murray, the guy who took over, joined, we were at about 400 people. And I was, I think, a pretty good CEO up to about 150 or 200. But then I started to get a little bit of strain when we got into the bigger size agency.
400 people.
And eventually he got us up to 500. So it got even bigger and even more unwielding for someone like me to run.
And so was everybody US based? I know you said you were doing something in Dublin, but was the brain trust in like Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, we opened a Dublin office and a Singapore office almost entirely because we had a couple of clients, big American clients that had wanted a European and an Asia presence, but we never had more than probably 30 people, I would say, outside the US. I think we had 11 offices in the US. Our biggest office initially was San Francisco, where we had over 100 people. That's where I'm based. Eventually, we moved the headquarters to Chicago, which later became our biggest office. And I think now, I mean, well, now we're part of this larger holding company, but over the pandemic, obviously, we let a lot of those offices go, and the team is mostly remote.
So, man, there's so many places to go. This is good. This is good, man. Congratulations. The thought of going from being in a coffee shop to having 400 or 500 people on the team and going from being president, founder, CEO to were you chairman of the board? Like, tell me about the board because before we didn't have a board, then you moved to the board.
Yeah, so when we sold the second time, we sold to two family offices, and that was the first time that I was no longer the majority owner of the business. So unlike the first deal, which was a majority of earn out and a minority of cash, we did a classic sort of private equity deal where, we took the majority of our payment was paid in cash, and then uh, we had a rollover that was the remaining. So I became for the first time a minority. Sorry, one second. There's some beeping in the back. So when I sold the second time, that was the first time I had a board, and I was not the chairman. We One of the private equity guys became chairman, which I was fine with, and I was just an active board member at that point. And over time, I'm a big advocate of the Entrepreneur's Operating System (EOS), which I'm sure people have sort of mentioned before on the. Sorry, do you hear the dog in the background? Okay. I'm a big advocate of EOS, and EOS has this concept of the accountability chart, which is you shouldn't be in an executive meeting unless you're actually accountable for a major part of the business. And so once I became just a board member and I found a professional CEO, um, I continued to be part of the board, but I fired myself from the executive meetings for the company as well because I no longer was responsible for anything. And at the end of the day, when you're not responsible for something in a meeting, you just end up throwing pot shots at other people. So, so really, I just continued to follow sort of my belief of like, fire yourself, fire yourself, fire yourself. And so by the time we ended up selling the third time, which was to a Dutch agency, I was just a strategic advisor to the company. I wasn't on any weekly meetings. Most people in the company, I would say, at some point didn't even know who I was. Thought I was some crotchety old guy in the corner. Um, but yeah, I successfully fired myself between the second and third exits.
How did you establish valuation? Did the investment banker do everything?
Well, I mean, valuation is whatever someone's willing to pay for your business. So um, I think there are common multiples in the industry that sort of, depending on the EBITDA you have, depending on the compound annual growth rate, revenue concentration, the degree to which your business is recurring revenue versus project-based revenue. Generally speaking, plus or minus a standard deviation of 10%, you sort of know what the valuation is going to be. I mentioned in the first time we sold, we did have this crazy situation where we got a 50% bump in valuation because we had an acquirer who was just, for reasons unrelated to us, had to make the acquisition. But the second and third time we sold, I mean, we had a expected outcome, and we were pretty close to that in terms of what we ended up getting.
So, did everything go well? Because it sounds like this thing was just easy peasy, nice and breezy.
No, everything does not always go well. As I said in the first acquisition, I think there were some challenges with what we thought was going to happen, what we had been told was going to happen, and then what really happened. I mean, I remember very distinctly negotiating the first contract, and there were some very sticky points. And the CEO of the acquiring company said, "David, look, we've been working on this deal for 3 months together. I'm going to do right by you. You got to trust me." And I said, there's an old Arab proverb, which is trust in Allah, but watch your camels. And I said, look, I trust you, but I also went to law school and I'm not going to just base this agreement based on a handshake. And so we negotiated very hard, very, very aggressively. And 6 months after we sold to that company, he got fired. Uh, and the new person came in and they didn't know anything other than the contract. Um, and that was stressful. I mean, I think it's the second stressful point in that first deal was when they said, you know what, we don't want to pay you the earnout, you know, which was 55% of our compensation. So that was a point where that did not go according to my plan. Ended up working out okay, but it caused a ton of stress. Um, I think when in the second deal, we had a very long negotiation period. in terms of signing the contract. And I think that, it's interesting because when you work with private equity companies, I mean, private equity companies at the end of the day, they have to optimize to return for their investors. And so, I was sort of a little bit more laid back than they were, and I had to sort of very quickly get sort of sharpen my sharpen my pencils and harden my claws and whatever to make that deal happen. And it was stressful. And one of the big challenges with M&A is typically it takes, I mean, 3 months would be a short time. I would say 6 to 9 months. And when you're doing that, you're often not paying attention to the core business, to your clients and to your staff. And so in the case of the second acquisition, we were, I think, on the called the 5 yard line to close the deal, and we lost two big clients. And one of them was a sort of a prevent was avoidable, unavoidable, I should say. I mean, they were just hell bent to bring the business in house. But one of them, I think, quite frankly, was because we were distracted. And so now you have a situation where the acquirer has said, "I'll pay you this much money based on this much profit," and suddenly your profit just went down by X% because you've been distracted by the investor, and now the investor is coming back and saying, "Well, I don't know if we pay you the same amount." So stuff like that happens and caused us a ton of stress, and we were able to get through it with a couple of bruises, but that was not an expected outcome either.
Did they drop the sales price or the purchase price?
Um, they we did end up giving them a little bit of a credit for some of that, and I was okay with it because I still felt like the deal we got was above what I expected to get out of the deal. And also, I mean, I think one of the challenges with M&A is there's always going to be tense moments. And, for the most part, lawyers and investment bankers, their job in large part is to shield you from these tough conversations so that because you have to work with the acquirer when all said and done. So I think I probably could have been a little bit more aggressive and pushed harder, but I also wanted to make sure that we had a good outcome. So that we were all happy when this was finished. So I didn't fight back too hard.
Pick your battles. That man's wise. He's been through a thing a time or two. So is your partner cashed out at this transaction because you didn't get it from the strategic?
Yeah, so he got cashed out,
Okay.
and he got and all of our original equity holders basically got paid in full. Um,
So
and then couple of people had to roll into the deal, and that was included me and a couple other people.
so all right. I think this is the chance, the spot where you get the wire, like the good one. It's probably a lot better than the first one. Uh did it scratch the itch? Like, were you like, oh man, I'm good?
I struggle with that question because I would say I really believe in this concept of hedonic adaptation or the hedonic treadmill, this notion that whatever happens to you in life, whether it's good or bad, after about 3 months, you adjust to that new standard of life. And so I definitely have to say that I've experienced that, where I mean, it was really cool to get that first check. And I do remember taking a screenshot of my bank account, showing it to my brother and saying, "Look at this, there's more zeros than I used to have, and this is pretty awesome." And then I kind of got used to it. And so I would say that's one perspective. The other perspective is I look back at that time when I was running the business, when I was still trying to hustle just to keep the business alive, to go through these negotiations with lawyers, to deal with, you know, members of my founding team who were yelling at me and threatening to sue me if they didn't get their money paid right away. I was probably about 30 pounds heavier than I am now. My cholesterol was out of whack. I was on anti-anxiety pills. I was depressed, and the pills weren't working anymore. And so I look back and I say, wow, my life is so less stressful today. Um, and so I think I do think it's I had to step back and sort of come to that conclusion. But yeah, I mean, I'm very thankful of where I am. I will say one other thing I will say is a realization that I had was that for many people, when they sell their business, they're selling their purpose and their identity for cash. And I think that is a really tough thing to deal with. I mean, I think for me, actually, the identity side of things has been the hardest because I kind of my ego was stroked by being the BMOC, the big man on campus, or the VIP, getting invited to a fancy dinner with some executive at Google, or getting flown to a conference and having a suite in Deer Valley or whatever. All that stuff was important to me, I realize. I think you had Bob Glazer on your show, or you're having him on your show, and he had this great concept of the difference between a VIP and a PIP. So a VIP, a very important person. A PIP is a previously important person. And so I feel like that's what I have. I feel like, you know, and that's hard. That's hard on the ego because I think that like I will admit that I don't have 100% self-esteem. I mean, even though I know I've had a lot of success, I still have imposter syndrome. And so all of that stuff sort of manifests itself when you're no longer running the show and you're sitting on the sidelines and writing your blog post in the dark corner of your room with no one else paying attention.
Yeah, man, we call that the founder's exit paradox. Some people call it existential crisis, but we think this is unique in that when you sell the business for the cash, if you haven't unraveled your identity from the business, which typically becomes one, especially if you do something for more than 5 or 10 years, you end up in a space and a place questioning um, self-image and relationships. And uh, we've identified six centers of doubt. So self-image, relationship, and work. And then there's health. Like, was it really worth all of that? Right? Cholesterol, pills, meds for your mental state, uh, prosperity. So, do I actually deserve this money? Do I keep it all so I make sure I don't run out since I cut off my cash flow, or do I spend it all because I don't think I should have it because I grew up poor or whatever the thing was? And then the last one is significance. So, how do I make sure that I matter? And is all that ever mattered that I built a company, or am I on destined to do something greater? And it's our goal to help people figure out how they're going to actually live out their life of significance and this exit be into excellence. Because I think many times the the business that we build, especially the first one, isn't what our true purpose is. Like that's not why we were put here. And then once we solve the time or the time for money problem, uh, we then have the freedom to actually manifest or create the thing that we were put here to do. And if the founder, the problem that we see is if the founder is trapped in that paradox, if they're in the valley in between the two mountains and they don't come back out, then we don't actually get that purpose created and have other people benefit from it. So what you describe is something that's very real and most people don't know that they're going to experience. Were you aware that like this is a thing or were you Superman of like, nah, it's not going to happen to me? Like how did you come to that place?
Yeah, I was not aware, and I would say I had a friend who sold his company before I sold it, and he got advice from someone, which is whatever you do after you sell your business, don't go cold turkey. And he said he was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, that sounds like sad. Let me take out my smallest violin in the world. It's so sad that you sold your business, and he didn't take it seriously. He quit cold turkey. He started hanging out at home all the time, and his wife and him had gotten into their sort of circles of they would connect sometimes, and other times they had their own lives, and suddenly their lives were in the same Venn diagram, and they ended up getting divorced after 6 months.
Mm.
And so I sort of he told me that story, and I sort of realized like, yeah, you have to sort of, I guess, be once it started happening to me, I realized, yeah, this is what's happening to me. I'm sort of like, I wasn't prepared for like the sea change in the way that I perceive myself, others perceive me. Um, so it took me probably a good year and a half of decompressing to sort of come to a point of sort of feeling okay. I mean, I did like the first once when I first left my job, I did a lot of yoga and a lot of hiking and 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 just trying to clear my mind. And it just took me probably that long. And I sort of said no to every opportunity. I just if it wasn't sort of a hike, I was like, no, I'm just doing meditation, doing yoga, whatever. And then after about a year and a half, I started to start saying yes to more things. So I joined a couple of nonprofit boards. I started doing a little bit of consulting, and I'm trying to find the balance, I think, is the answer. I mean, I think that, like, your point, you have the sort of the six factors. There's another sort of there's a book, or there's an article by a guy named AJ Wasserstein that you may have read, from Yale, who talks about what do people do when they exit. And he also I think had six things. It was like, you can become a professor, you can become a student, you can become an investor, you can become a philanthropist, you can become a bon vivant, just go travel to islands. You can spend all your time with your family, etc. And I sort of, anyways, I think that like I've sort of realized that, like, somewhere in those group of things, there's something that's going to work for me. A little bit of entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
but also a little bit of being a teacher. I mean, a teacher and sort of a consultant. I don't want to be a you know, I don't want to be a bon vivant. I can't imagine myself just like literally like island hopping for the rest of my life, but I want to do a little bit of that. So I'm finally figuring out the balance, but it's taken a while.
Yeah, I think anytime you go through that journey alone, it takes a while because you're kind of bouncing around and you don't get the gift of other people's experiences to not walk down hallways with locked doors. It's just kind of trying to find which one opens and which one has what you're looking for. We've got a four-step process, and so what you described is pretty cool. So our four-step process is centered around the word next, because everybody's looking for your next or what's next, and the N is for nourish. And so you nourish yourself, you reflected, I assume, on those hikes. I suspect you probably weren't listening to rock music while you were walking. And the yoga, of course, is going in and making you um, reflect and consider. I think it's really hard to read the label on the jar. So our process involves an interview and then a report back to you so that you have an objective observer kind of putting the pieces together for you so that you can consider them in a different way. Then we evaluate. And so what do we actually want to do? We know what the resources are that are available. We know what we more than likely we know what the problem is in the people. Um, and then we evaluate what options are there, and then the next one is explore. So I think I want to do this, but I don't really know until I start doing it. And so we explore those things, and eventually we transcend and actually move into the thing that we're going to do and execute and deliver and make that impact on folks. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, you're trying to get to self-actualization, but the next level above actualization is transcendence. And money only solves the first two levels, right? There's the basic needs, the physiological needs. Those first two things is what money solves. And so the hedonistic treadmill that you mentioned, you can burn it all up there just trying to get more of that. But the love and belonging and the impact and the self-actualization, like, that stuff has very little to do with money and very much to do with the non-renewable resource of the investment of your time, and then the energy piece of it as well, which is a resource that most people don't actually think about. Uh, I love that you actually took the time. People say, "Hey, take a year off," and you said, "Yeah, took me about 3 months." Like, a lot of people, that we just had one lady that exited, and it was north of 1 million for one of her practices. She had multiple practices, and she was just selling one off. And like, the weekend went, and she was like, "Is there anything else? Like, am I going to feel anything else related to the money?" And it's like, no, you're not. And it's only going to get worse because you just get used to it and it's just there. And now you have this new standard, and that new standard then changes. There was a point probably in your life when $100 was a lot of money, then 1,000 was a lot, and then 10,000 was a lot, and then 100,000 was a lot. And now 1 million felt like a lot until you had it. And there's people who have 10 million and 100 million, and there's some billionaires, and maybe one day they'll be a trillionaire. But the thing is, it just continues to rise, and what you do with that and what you make meaning of from that is um, really important because you can get ungrateful. And you were talking about the violin. Most people who go through it don't feel like they can talk to anybody about it because nobody really understands, or they feel guilty because they don't want to sound ungrateful. And you put all this stuff in, but you got really amazing people really suffering, and they don't really have a diagnosis. I guess if it gets deep enough, you can call it depression. But for most people, it's like, man, I traded in what I've been working on for 10 years for money. And then the money doesn't really do anything because it's only a tool. But what do I apply my energy against? What do I apply this beautiful brain that I've created that solved all these problems to help us survive, and the resilience and the grit that I had to use to get through the tough times? And was it really worth going through the deal fatigue? And, you just get to this place where it's like, man, should I have just kept it? And then I watch people who say, I'm never retiring, I'm gonna die in a meeting. And it's like, yeah, great, but you don't get the liquidity event. And that's really the only thing that you can transfer if you want to transfer to something else. Extracting that value from the enterprise is one of the most important things you can do as a founder, because then you can reallocate that and redistribute it to solve bigger and, I think, more impressive problems. Sorry.
Yeah, you had a lot of good points in there. I would say number one, a high class problem is still a problem. Um, so, you know, that's just the truth. I mean, it's even though it sounds like it's a poor me, it's still a problem. Secondly, I think one of the things that happens when you sell your business is you get out of the rat race. And the rat race actually is a pretty comforting place because at some level you have sort of blinders on and you're just trying to get slightly farther ahead. So if I can just get promoted from vice president to senior vice president, then I'll be happy. And then you get to senior vice president. Well, if I can just get promoted to CEO, I'll be happy. But when you have an exit and you're completely out of the rat race, suddenly you have this existential crisis where you're like, what do I do with my time? What's my purpose on earth? All that stuff that doesn't matter when you're just trying to sort of get promoted or just get a 10% raise suddenly does matter. And I will say I like your concept of Maslow. I've never heard of the transcendence. That's great. But I always tell people that, like, in your life, in the working world, Maslow is applied to the working world as you have a job, which is puts money on the bread on the table. You have a career, which is like you're hopefully advancing towards something, and then you have a calling. And the calling is when you really have identified something that you really can put your heart into and really find value out of it. And a lot of founders, I do think, founding their agency is their calling. And when they sell, sometimes that calling is now gone. And so you either, I guess, go up to transcendence or you get reincarnated and you have to start over as an earthworm.
And for a lot of people, they don't know that transcendence exists. And they don't find the yoga, they don't find the more spiritual things, and realizing that it's not really about the money, and there's so much more to life than that. Man, this has been so good, man. We gotta talk Bob. We gotta tell Bob that this was a match made in heaven, man. I really appreciate you making time for us, and I could go on and on, but uh, the vulnerability on that piece is just so important. I think you're going to protect a lot of founders from walking into the exit paradox and thinking that everything's going to be just fine without them having a plan. It's not. And regardless of what you do, you're going to experience some pain. That's part of it. But what doesn't have to be part of it is suffering unnecessarily. And we can absolutely help people move through that process a little bit quicker, and think get them some bigger results so that they feel like themselves, because that's the part of it that I think most people, the way most people describe it, I just don't feel like myself anymore. And that doesn't have to be the old self, it can be the new self. We want you feeling like yourself, and out here making an impact in the world, because the world needs you.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think you're providing a great service. And where were you 3 years ago?
We were
Maybe you were around.
here.
I didn't get referred to you. That was the problem.
So we didn't triangulate it. We gotta get the billboard going, and
Yep.
then we gotta get
Yep.
we gotta triangulate it.
Yep.
Um, so I'm gonna call you D-Rod finally, because we got to
All
the
right.
end. I feel like we're friends now, man. Thank you so much. You're the epitome of a dream catcher. Just thinking about the deal fatigue and how many people would have given up or quit on that journey and how you fought through and you people got on the bus and off the bus along the way and regardless you just kept going and you've gotten to a place where you've created wealth for a lot of people and that for me is really exciting. And then not only the wealth but then the impact on those lives and the doors that have been opened. So man, you're a great guest for the Dreamcatchers podcast for sure.
Thank you, Jerome. It's great to be here. And I think you need to come on my podcast because I've got a lot of agency founders who we need to triangulate and get your message out to them. So that's our next step.
That's exciting, man. I look forward to that opportunity. Hey, to the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.